I overheard my wife's secret scheme and everything changed. The sun began to set beyond the horizon, casting a warm golden light over the sea as our cruise ship glided effortlessly through the Caribbean waters. I stood leaning against the railing of our suite's balcony, sipping on a glass of sparkling wine, while the ocean stretched endlessly around us. Everything felt perfect. We were just 3 days into our honeymoon, and I still couldn't believe how fortunate I was. The woman of my dreams, beautiful, magnetic, and completely captivating, smiled softly as she came to stand beside me. Her fingers brushed lightly against my arm, sending a shiver through me. Her name was Rachel. We had met only 6 months ago at a charity auction. I had attended more out of duty than interest, but well, I still wasn't sure why she was there. From the first moment we connected, it was electric. Her soft, honey blonde hair framed a face full of life, with eyes that sparkled mischievously. It didn't take long for me to fall head over heels. Every moment after that night we were together, and the intensity of our connection grew, until I couldn't imagine life without her. The wedding had been a whirlwind, extravagant, and everything she dreamed of. But I didn't care about the expenses after all. I had done quite well for myself. I wanted to give her the best. As we said our vows, her eyes locked on mine, and I truly felt like the luckiest man alive. Rachel was mine, and I was hers. Our honeymoon was the start of our new life together. Rachel glanced at me with that knowing, seductive smile she often gave, her voice soft and lilting as she said, "This is paradise, isn't it?" Her words were like music, pulling at something deep inside of me. I nodded, completely lost in her gaze. "It is," I murmured. "I'm the luckiest man in the world?" She laughed, the sound playful but with a hint of mystery, before pressing her body close against mine. My hand instinctively trailed down her back, feeling the warmth of her skin through the thin fabric of her dress. The night air was thick with the scent of the ocean and tropical flowers, stirring a sense of anticipation for the evening to come. "I need to make a quick call," Rachel said, excusing herself and stepping inside. I stayed behind on the balcony, taking another sip of my drink, replaying the events of the past months in my mind. Everything had happened so quickly, but it had felt right. We felt right. But then I heard her voice, clear through the slight crack in the door, carrying a tone I'd never heard before, cold, calculating. "He doesn't suspect a thing," she said, her words slicing through the night air like a knife. "The idiot thinks I actually love him. It's all going perfectly according to plan." My breath caught in my throat, and the glass slipped from my hand, shattering on the deck below. My heart pounded as I strained to hear the rest of her conversation. "When I'm pregnant, I'll take him for everything," Rachel continued, her voice dripping with icy confidence. "The divorce will be quick and easy money." My entire world came crashing down in that moment. Well, the woman I loved, the woman I had just married, had never loved me. The truth of her words slammed into me like a physical blow, and I felt the air leave my lungs. Rachel was using me. She had been playing me all along. I gripped the railing tightly, my knuckles turning white as her voice echoed in my mind. The plan was simple: get pregnant, then take everything I owned in a divorce. The confidence in her tone, the sheer audacity of it, made me feel sick. I couldn't believe I had been so blind. Her voice drifted from the room again. "Once I have what I want, I'll be free of him, free to live the life I deserve." I glanced inside. Rachel stood by the bed, still on the phone, laughing softly into it as if she hadn't just plotted my destruction. The laugh that once made my heart race now chilled me to the bone. Of the woman I thought I knew, the one I had shared my life and my bed with, was a stranger. No worse than a stranger. She was a predator and I was her prey. What should I do? Storm in there? Confront her? The anger surged inside me, boiling up until it almost exploded. I wanted to demand answers, scream at her for deceiving me, but I stopped myself. She was smart, much smarter than I had given her credit for. If I confronted her now, she could turn it all around, deny everything, make me look like a paranoid fool. No, I needed proof. Real, solid proof. The idea of spending another night with her, of even touching her again, made my skin crawl. But I had to play along, at least for now. I needed to buy myself time to figure out my next move. I took a deep breath and forced myself to calm down. I had to be careful. This wasn't just about money anymore. There was something far darker at play. I could feel it. I stepped back into the suite, trying to compose myself, putting on the mask of the loving husband. Rachel had just ended her call and turned to me with that same warm, inviting smile, as though nothing had changed. "Who was that?" I asked casually, pretending not to care. "Oh, just a friend," she said dismissively, waving her hand as if it were nothing. She crossed the room to me, wrapping her arms around my neck, pulling me in for a kiss. Her lips were soft, but they felt like poison now. I kissed her back, forcing my body to go through the motions, while my mind screamed for me to pull away. I needed to keep up the act, at least until I could gather the evidence I needed. Her hands roamed down my chest, teasing, tempting, as she looked up at me through her lashes. "Why don't we take this to the bedroom?" she whispered, her voice sultry and inviting. Every fiber of my being told me to push her away, but I couldn't, not yet. I forced another smile and nodded, sure. Rachel led me to the bed, pulling me down on top of her. Her body was warm and familiar, but all I felt was cold. My mind was miles away, trying to figure out how to play this without her knowing I was onto her. As she unbuttoned my shirt, I watched her closely, trying to spot any cracks in her mask. But she was good, damn good. She had spent months perfecting this role, playing the part of the loving, devoted wife, and I couldn't afford to slip up now. I had to keep her thinking I was still the clueless, adoring husband she'd been fooling all along. The night dragged on, every touch, every whisper of false passion like a twisted game of pretend. I hated myself for going along with it, but I had no choice. I had to stay close, watch her every move, bide my time until I had enough evidence to expose her. When it was over, she fell asleep in my arms, her head resting on my chest like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Everything was a lie. I lay there in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts spinning. What else had she hidden from me? How far did her betrayal go? And most importantly, how could I get out of this without her realizing that I knew? I barely slept that night. My mind was racing too much, filled with questions, doubts, and a growing fear that Rachel was even more dangerous than I initially thought. By the time the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, I had already made up my mind. I needed to gather concrete evidence, something that would protect me if and when everything fell apart. Carefully, I slipped out of bed, making sure not to wake her. I knew I had to move quickly but quietly. The first thing I checked was her phone, but of course it was locked with a passcode I didn't know. Rachel was always so meticulous, and I knew she wouldn't be careless enough to leave it unwarded. I had to find another way. Frustrated but determined, I grabbed my own phone, searching for ways to protect myself, private investigators, divorce attorneys, anything that might give me an edge. But being stuck on a cruise ship in the middle of the Caribbean left me isolated. I couldn't contact anyone without Rachel noticing. I was trapped for now, and I needed to keep playing my part. As I scrolled through options, my eyes kept flicking to Rachel, who was still sound asleep. I had to stay one step ahead of her. If I slipped up even once, she would turn everything against me. She was too clever, too calculating. For all I knew, she could have people watching my accounts, tracking my every move. Just then, Rachel stirred in the bed, her soft murmurs filling the quiet room. I quickly put my phone away and forced myself to calm down. I couldn't let her suspect anything was wrong. I couldn't risk tipping her off before I had solid proof. I slipped back into bed beside her, wrapping my arms around her as she woke up. "Morning," she whispered, her voice still thick with sleep. "Morning," I replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead, even though the taste of the words was bitter in my mouth. The day passed in a blur, as though I was on autopilot. We spent it lounging by the pool, sipping cocktails and exploring the ship. But my mind was elsewhere the entire time, constantly on high alert. Every smile she gave me, every laugh, felt like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. She played her part flawlessly, as always. To anyone watching, we were the perfect, happy newlyweds. But I knew better now. Everything was a charade. Later at dinner, I finally saw an opportunity. Rachel excused herself to use the restroom, leaving her phone on the table. My heart raced as I glanced around the busy dining room. It was crowded, noisy, and everyone seemed focused on their own meals. I reached for her phone, my hands shaking as I tried to guess the passcode. I started with her birthday. Nothing. Our wedding date. Still nothing. Time was running out, and I could feel the panic rising in my chest. Then, suddenly, it hit me: her mother's birthday. I punched in the numbers and the phone unlocked. A wave of adrenaline surged through me, but I knew I didn't have long. I quickly opened her messages and began scanning through them, searching for anything suspicious. Most of the texts were mundane conversations with friends, but then I saw a name that made my blood run cold: Leo. I opened the thread, and my stomach dropped as I scrolled through the messages. They were filled with flirtatious banter and thinly veiled references to their plan. The way they talked about me, about how I was just a pawn, how Rachel had been playing the perfect wife while scheming to take everything, made me feel sick. Leo wasn't just a friend. He was her co-conspirator, someone she'd been working with from the start. I took screenshots of the messages and sent them to my own phone for safekeeping. Just as I was about to lock her phone, I heard footsteps approaching. I quickly placed it back on the table and picked up my glass, trying to look casual as Rachel returned. "Miss me?" she teased, sitting down and taking a sip of her wine. Always, I forced out with a grin, though inside I was seething. The rest of dinner was pure torture. Every word out of her mouth was another dagger, but I had to play along. I had to keep up the act, even though I wanted to confront her right there and demand answers. I couldn't risk it, not yet. Back in our suite, Rachel tried to be affectionate again, her hands on me, her touch familiar yet unbearable now, but I couldn't do it. I couldn't pretend any longer. I made an excuse about being tired and slipped into the bathroom, locking the door behind me. I stared at myself in the mirror, my reflection a stranger. My face was pale, my eyes hollow. How had it come to this? How had I been so blind? I splashed cold water on my face, trying to calm the storm inside me. I needed to figure out my next move, but the walls were closing in, and I was trapped in this nightmare. I took a deep breath, staring at my reflection in the mirror. I couldn't let her win. Not like this. I needed to stay focused, to be smarter, more careful. Tomorrow I'd find a way to gather more evidence to protect myself. But for tonight I had to keep playing the part. I stepped out of the bathroom, forcing a smile as I crawled into bed beside Rachel. She snuggled close, her body warm against mine, but I felt nothing but a deep, cold emptiness. The next morning I woke up with a plan. I couldn't confront her, not yet. I had to be smart about this, gather as much evidence as possible before making my move. My heart ached at the thought of what I had to do, but there was no time for emotion now. This wasn't about love anymore. This was about survival. Rachel was already awake, humming softly as she brushed her hair in front of the mirror. She looked so innocent, so beautiful, it made it hard to reconcile the woman I had fallen in love with and the cold, manipulative person she really was. I forced myself to smile at her, playing the role of the adoring husband. She turned and smiled back, her eyes bright, completely unaware that everything had changed. We headed down to breakfast, where I did my best to act normal. I nodded, laughed at her stories, and made casual conversation, but my mind was elsewhere, plotting my next move. I needed to get into her phone again. The messages with Leo were the key. If I could find more, maybe I could uncover the full extent of their plan. After breakfast, we walked the deck together, hand in hand. The sun was shining, the sea stretched out endlessly before us, and other couples passed by, smiling and carefree. I envied them. They didn't have to worry about being betrayed by the person they trusted most. Back in our suite, I suggested we take a nap before the day's activities. Rachel agreed, and as soon as she was asleep, I carefully reached for her phone on the nightstand. I had memorized the passcode now, and with shaking hands, I quickly unlocked it. As I scrolled through her messages with Leo, my blood ran cold. There was more here, much more. They talked openly about how they had strung me along, manipulating me, making me feel secure and loved so I wouldn't suspect a thing. Leo's messages were full of confidence, and it was clear they had done this before. I felt sick. They were planning to destroy me, and I had been blind to it all. I took more screenshots and sent them to my phone, just in case. The deeper I dug, the worse it became. They weren't just planning to divorce me and take my money. They were discussing ways to frame me for something serious. It wasn't clear exactly what, but the implication was enough to make my stomach twist in knots. If they succeeded, I could end up in prison, or worse. I returned her phone to its place and lay back down, my mind racing. I needed help, but I didn't know who to trust. We were isolated here, cut off from the outside world. If I reached out to the wrong person, it could tip them off. The rest of the day was a blur. We went through the motions of being a happy couple, but every moment felt like a performance. I watched Rachel closely, looking for any sign that she suspected I knew the truth, but she was flawless. Every word, every gesture was calculated to keep me under her spell. That night, as she drifted off to sleep beside me, I slipped out of bed again and locked myself in the bathroom. I stared at my reflection, the exhaustion and fear etched deep into my face. I couldn't keep this up for much longer. The stress of pretending, of living this double life, was eating me alive. I pulled out my phone and started searching for options, private investigators, lawyers, anything that could help me when we docked. But then, a terrifying thought crossed my mind. What if she was monitoring my accounts? Given how meticulous she was, it wasn't unlikely. If she saw me contacting a lawyer, she might strike first. I couldn't risk that. I closed my eyes, trying to calm the rising panic. I needed to keep my head. What would she least expect? Then, it hit me. If I couldn't fight her from the outside, I needed to do it from within. I had to play along, make her believe I was still in the dark. But at the same time, I needed to dig deeper, to find something irrefutable. I took a deep breath, steadying my nerves. Tomorrow, I'd start asking her about our future, about kids, the kind of life she wanted. I'd play the role of the clueless, doubting husband. I'd make her think she was winning. And while she was busy gloating, I'd be digging deeper, gathering more evidence. The next morning, I woke up with renewed determination. Rachel was already up, preparing for another day in paradise. I smiled at her, though it took everything in me to suppress the bitterness rising in my chest. We spent the day exploring the ship, enjoying the luxurious amenities, but I made sure to shower her with attention, asking about her dreams for the future. She was careful, sticking to vague answers, but I could see the wheels turning in her mind. She was starting to relax, starting to believe that her plan was working. That evening, I suggested we have a special dinner, just the two of us. I made reservations at the ship's most exclusive restaurant, a romantic spot with a breathtaking view of the ocean. As we sat down, I reached across the table and took her hand, looking into her eyes. Rachel, I said softly, I've been thinking a lot about our future, but I want to start a family with you. I want to build a life together. Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise flashing across her face before she quickly masked it with a smile. That sounds wonderful, she replied, her voice worn. I've been thinking about that too. I smiled back, even as the tension in my chest tightened. I know we haven't talked about it much, but I'm ready. Let's do it. Let's start trying for a baby. Her grip on my hand tightened, just for a fraction of a second, and I saw something flicker in her eyes. Satisfaction, maybe. She nodded slowly, her guard lowering just a little. I'd like that, she said softly. We spent the rest of the evening talking about baby names, what our future children might look like. It was all an act, of course, but I needed her to believe it. I needed her to think she was in control. As the night wore on, Rachel seemed more at ease. Her laughter became more genuine, her touch more affectionate. She was convinced her plan was working, that I was none the wiser, and for the first time in days, I felt like I had the upper hand. I was getting closer to the truth, to exposing everything. After dinner, we took a walk on the deck. The cool ocean breeze washed over us as we leaned against the railing, looking out at the endless sea. Rachel leaned into me, her body warm against mine, and I wrapped my arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. This is perfect, she whispered, her voice soft and content. I'm so glad we're doing this. I've never been happier. I forced a smile, though inside, my emotions were a whirlwind of fear and anger. Me too, I said, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. We headed back to our suite, where Rachel was more passionate than usual. Her kisses were deeper, her movements more urgent, as if she was trying to solidify her hold over me. I matched her intensity, keeping up the act, but inside I was numb. This was all part of her game, part of her plan to keep me wrapped around her finger. But as our bodies intertwined, despite everything I had learned, I couldn't help but feel a twisted, bitter surge of desire. She was beautiful, sensual, and she knew exactly how to drive me wild. It infuriated me how much power she still had over me, even though I knew the truth. Afterwards, she fell asleep quickly, a satisfied smile on her face. I lay beside her, staring up at the ceiling, my mind racing. I had bought myself some time, but it wasn't enough. I needed to act soon before Rachel decided to push forward with her plan. The next few days followed the same pattern. I played the part of the loving husband, showering her with attention, asking her about our future. I made sure she believed she was in control, that everything was going according to her plan. Meanwhile, I continued to dig deeper, taking every opportunity to gather more evidence. I asked her about our finances, about her thoughts on where we should live once we started our family. She was careful with her answers, always keeping things vague, but I could tell she was beginning to relax, to trust that I was completely under her spell. But I knew the confrontation was coming. The pressure of pretending, of playing the perfect husband while knowing she was plotting my destruction, was wearing me down. I couldn't keep this up much longer. Every day on that ship felt like a countdown to disaster. One evening, after a quiet dinner in our suite, I decided it was time. The soft breeze drifted through the open balcony doors, the sound of the ocean a constant hum in the background. Rachel sat across from me, sipping a glass of red wine, her eyes meeting mine with that familiar, seductive smile. It was now or never. I set my own glass down and leaned forward slightly, my voice steady but firm. "Rachel, we need to talk." She raised an eyebrow, still smiling, but I could see the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She took another sip of her wine before replying, "Of course, darling. What's on your mind?" I had rehearsed this moment in my head 1,000 times, but now that it was here, the words caught in my throat. I cleared it, forcing myself to stay calm. "I've been thinking a lot about our future, about everything we've built together." She nodded, leaning forward as well, her hand reaching out to cover mine. "That's sweet. I've been thinking about it too. I can't wait to start our family." There it was again, the calculated move to draw me in, to make me believe in a future she had no intention of sharing. I gently pulled my hand away, keeping my voice steady. "But I can't shake the feeling that there's something you're not telling me." Her smile faltered for a split second, but she quickly recovered, laughing softly. "What do you mean? I've been completely honest with you." The lie was so smooth, so effortless, that it took everything in me not to lose control right then and there. But I couldn't. Not yet. "I overheard you, Rachel," I said, my voice cutting through her charade. "I heard you on the phone talking about me, about your plans." Her expression changed instantly. The smile vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating look I had never seen before. She set her glass down slowly, her eyes narrowing. "What exactly did you hear?" My heart raced, but I forced myself to stay calm, knowing I was treading on dangerous ground. "I heard enough. Enough to know that you never loved me, that this has all been a game to you, a way to get to my money." She didn't deny it. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, studying me with a detached, almost amused expression, as if calculating her next move. "And what are you going to do about it?" she asked, her voice icy. I swallowed hard, the tension between us crackling like electricity. "But I want to know the truth, Rachel. All of it. How far does this go? Are you planning to take everything and disappear? Or is there something worse?" For a moment she just stared at me, her expression unreadable. Then slowly she stood up, walking around the table toward me. I tensed but didn't move. She stopped right in front of me, leaning down so her face was inches from mine. Her breath was hot against my skin as she whispered, "The truth? You couldn't handle the truth." I held her gaze, refusing to back down. "Try me." She straightened up, her smile returning, only now it was twisted, dark. "Fine, you want the truth. Here it is. Yes, I married you for your money. Yes, I planned to divorce you and take everything. But then I realized something. You're weak, easily manipulated. Why settle for just half of your fortune when I could take it all?" My blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" She circled behind me, her fingers brushing the back of my neck, sending a chill down my spine. "I'm talking about making sure you're out of the picture completely, permanently." I jumped up from the chair, spinning to face her. "You're planning to kill me." Her smile widened, and she tilted her head as if considering it. "Maybe Reagan, maybe I'll let someone else do it for me. Someone like Leo." Leo, the name burned through my mind like a brand. The man I thought was just a friend, just part of her act, was in on this too. "You've been working with him from the start, haven't you?" I asked, my voice shaking with anger. "Of course," she replied almost lazily. "Leo and I go way back. We've done this before. A rich, gullible husband, a tragic accident, and then we walk away with everything." My heart pounded in my chest as the pieces of the puzzle finally came together. This wasn't just about money. It was about power, control, and I had been nothing but a pawn in their sick game. "You won't get away with this," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and anger. "I have evidence. The messages, the phone calls. I've recorded everything." Rachel laughed, a chilling sound that echoed off the walls of the suite. "You think that's going to stop me?" She took a step closer, her eyes narrowing with a menacing gleam. "By the time anyone looks into this, you'll be long gone. An accident at sea. A grieving widow. No one will question it." My breath came in shallow gasps as the reality of her words sank in. She wasn't bluffing. She had planned everything meticulously, down to the last detail. I was trapped, stuck in this nightmare with no way out. I began to back away toward the door, my mind racing. I needed to get to the ship's security, to tell anyone what was happening. But before I could reach the handle, Rachel moved faster than I expected, blocking my path. "Going somewhere?" she asked, her voice dripping with venom. I met her gaze, the anger inside me boiling over. "I'm not going to let you do this," I said through clenched teeth. She stepped closer, so close that I could feel the heat of her body, the sickly sweet scent of her perfume filling my senses. "And how exactly do you plan to stop me?" she whispered, her voice low and dangerous. "You're alone, isolated on this ship. No one will believe you. Everyone thinks we're the perfect couple, the newlyweds in love." Her words cut deep because I knew they were true. We had played our part so well, convinced everyone around us that we were the picture of happiness. If I tried to tell anyone the truth now, who would believe me? But I couldn't give up. I couldn't let her win. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "Well, maybe you're right," I said, forcing my voice to remain calm. "Maybe no one will believe me, but I'll fight you every step of the way. I won't let you win." Rachel tilted her head as if considering my words. Then, without warning, she lunged at me, her hands going for my throat. I reacted instinctively, grabbing her wrists and pushing her back. But she was stronger than I expected. We struggled, our bodies crashing into the furniture, the sound of breaking glass filling the room. My mind raced, searching for a way out, but I knew I couldn't overpower her. Not like this. Her fingers tightened around my throat, cutting off my air. Panic surged through me, and I knew I had to do anything to get out of this. With a burst of adrenaline, I twisted my body, throwing her off balance. She stumbled, and I took the opportunity to break free, gasping for air as I backed away. But Rachel was relentless. She came at me again, her eyes wild with fury. "You're not going to ruin this for me," she screamed, her voice shrill. I dodged her attack, my mind spinning, desperately searching for a way out. Then I saw at the open balcony door. The cool night air beckoned, a chance for escape. Without thinking, I made a run for it, dashing out onto the balcony. But Rachel was right behind me. She grabbed my arm, pulling me back with surprising strength. We struggled, teetering on the edge of the balcony, the ocean churning far below. I could feel her trying to push me over, trying to end this once and for all. But I wasn't going to let her win. Not like this. With everything I had left, I shoved her away from me. Rachel stumbled, her eyes wide with shock as she lost her balance. There was a sickening thud as she hit the deck, lying still, her chest heaving as she gasped for breath. I stood there, my body trembling, my mind numb. I had stopped her. I had won. But the victory felt hollow. The reality of what had just happened began to sink in. Rachel wasn't dead, but she was hurt, and the consequences of what I had done, of everything that had led to this moment, crashed over me like a wave. But it wasn't over yet. I needed to get help. I had to make sure she couldn't turn this against me. I rushed back inside, grabbing the phone and calling the ship's security. My voice was shaking as I told them there had been an accident, that my wife was hurt and needed help. They responded quickly, but it felt like an eternity before they arrived. When they did, they found Rachel still lying on the deck, her breathing shallow. They took her away on a stretcher, and I was left standing alone in the suite, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on me. I should have felt relieved, but all I felt was emptiness. The woman I had once loved was gone, destroyed by her own greed, her own cruelty, and now I had to live with what I had done. I sank into a chair, my head in my hands. The adrenaline was finally wearing off, and my body ached from the struggle. My throat was sore from where her hands had gripped me, but none of it compared to the pain in my chest. The pain of betrayal. Of love turned to ash. But I couldn't afford to dwell on it. There was still work to be done. I needed to gather the evidence to make sure that when the authorities investigated, they would see the truth. I needed to protect myself to ensure that I wouldn't end up the one in jail. Hours passed as I meticulously gathered everything I had on Rachel, the messages, the recordings, the evidence of her betrayal. It was methodical work, but it kept my mind from spiraling, from focusing on what had just happened. Finally, there was a knock on the door. It was the ship's security along with the doctor. They informed me that Rachel was stable, but she would need to be airlifted to a hospital when we docked. They asked me what had happened, and I told them the truth, or at least as much of it as I could. I told them she had attacked me, that I had been defending myself. They nodded, taking notes, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. I had played my part too well, and now it might come back to haunt me. They left eventually, and once again I was left alone with my thoughts. The suite felt oppressively quiet, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I couldn't sleep, couldn't even sit still. I paced the room, replaying the events over and over in my mind. Had I done the right thing? Could I have handled it differently? But it was too late for that now. The only thing I could do was prepare for what came next. The authorities would be waiting when we docked, and I needed to be ready. I needed to make sure the truth came out, that Rachel's lies didn't bury me too. As the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, I finally allowed myself to sit down. My body was exhausted, my mind numb. I stared out at the ocean, at the endless expanse of water that had almost become my grave. I had survived. But at what cost? The authorities were waiting when we docked. The moment the ship pulled into port, I knew there was no escape from the reality of what had happened. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched the uniformed officers board, their faces grim. I felt like a caged animal, trapped by the weight of my actions and by the secrets I had uncovered. Rachel was still unconscious when they wheeled her off the ship. She was alive, but barely. The image of her lying on that stretcher haunted me, a twisted reminder of how close I had come to losing everything. The officers approached me, their voices polite but firm, asking me to come with them. I followed, feeling the eyes of the other passengers on me, the whispers that followed in my wake. We had been the perfect couple in their eyes, newlyweds, deeply in love. Now they were watching the illusion shatter. In a small, sterile room at the port, I sat across from a detective who introduced himself as Detective Harris. He was in his late 40s, his face lined with experience and a look that said he had seen more than his fair share of human darkness. His eyes were sharp, probing, as if he could see straight into my soul. "Mr. Daniels," he began, his voice calm but laced with authority, "we need to understand exactly what happened on that ship." I nodded, my throat dry. "I'll tell you everything." And I did. I started from the beginning, from the moment I overheard Rachel's phone conversation. I told him about the text, the plan she and Leo had concocted to ruin me and take everything I had. I laid it all out, the lies, the manipulation, the fear that had built up inside me, until I felt like I had no choice but to confront her. Detective Harris listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, tapping a pen against his notebook. "You're saying your wife admitted to planning to kill you?" "Yes," I replied, my voice shaking. She didn't deny it. She even laughed about it like it was some kind of sick joke. He nodded slowly. "And you have evidence of this?" I pulled out my phone, showing him the screenshots of the texts and the recordings of the conversations. I watched his face as he read, as he listened, and I could see the shift in his demeanor. The skepticism was still there, but now it was mixed with something else concern, maybe even a hint of belief. "This is damning evidence, Mr. Daniels," he said after a long pause. "But you understand we'll need to corroborate your story. We'll need to interview other passengers, examine the scene." "I understand," I said, my voice steadier now. "I'll cooperate fully." He studied me for a moment longer, then nodded. "For now, we'll need you to stay in the city. We may have more questions." I had expected this, but the reality of it still hit hard. I wasn't free, not yet. There was still a trial to face, still the possibility that everything could go horribly wrong. I nodded again, and he stood, signaling that the interview was over for now. They let me go, but not far. I was escorted to a nearby hotel, where I was told to wait. The hours dragged by, each one a torment, as I sat alone in that room, replaying everything in my mind. The confrontation, the fight, the moment I had pushed her away. Could I have handled it differently? Should I have done something else? But there was no going back now. I had done what I had to do to survive. Now I had to focus on what came next. 2 weeks later, the trial began. It was a media circus from the start, the kind of sensational case that drew attention from all corners. The press dubbed it the honeymoon horror, splashing pictures of Rachel and me across every headline. They painted me as a wealthy man driven to violence by jealousy, and her as the beautiful, innocent victim. I sat in the courtroom, feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. My lawyer, Linda Grayson, was sharp and relentless in her defense. I trusted her with my life, but even she knew how high the stakes were. If the jury believed Rachel's side of the story, I could lose everything: my freedom, my reputation, my future. The prosecution painted me as the villain, a man who couldn't handle the thought of his wife leaving him, who lashed out in a fit of rage. They leaned into the narrative of the jealous husband, desperate to control the woman he loved. They downplayed the evidence I had gathered, framing it as paranoia, as the desperate actions of a man who knew his marriage was falling apart. Rachel sat across from me, pale and bandaged, playing the part of the wounded victim perfectly. Her eyes were downcast, her voice soft and trembling when she testified. She told the court that she had never planned to leave me, that she loved me, but that I had become possessive, violent, that I had attacked her in a jealous rage, and she had to defend herself. As I listened to her testimony, I could feel the anger boiling inside me. She was lying through her teeth, but she was doing it so convincingly that even I began to doubt myself for a moment. But then I remembered the text, the conversations, the way she had laughed at the idea of killing me. I held on to that, refusing to let her rewrite the story. When it was my turn to testify, I stood and walked to the witness stand, feeling the eyes of the jury on me. The weight of their judgment pressed down on me as I sat down. Linda gave me a reassuring nod, but it did little to calm my nerves. I took a deep breath and began to tell my side of the story. I told them about the love I had felt for Rachel, the way I believed we were starting a life together. I described the moment I overheard her on the phone, how my world shattered when I realized she had never loved me. I presented the evidence, the texts, the recordings, everything that led up to that fateful night. Linda's questions were direct, guiding me through the events carefully and methodically. She allowed me to paint a clear picture of what had happened. As I spoke, I saw some of the jury members nodding, their expressions softening as they listened. It gave me a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they would see the truth. But the cross-examination was brutal. The prosecutor tried to twist my words to make me seem unhinged and paranoid. He brought up the fact that I hadn't gone to the authorities immediately, that I had confronted Rachel on my own. He questioned my motives, trying to plant seeds of doubt in the jury's minds. But I held my ground. I stuck to the truth, to the facts. I reminded myself that I had nothing to hide, that I was fighting for my life. I could see the prosecutor's frustration growing as he failed to shake me, and it gave me strength. Finally, the trial reached its climax. The closing arguments were made, and the jury was sent to deliberate. The wait was agonizing, every minute stretching into an eternity as I sat in that courtroom, staring at the empty jury box. When they finally returned, the air was thick with tension. I watched them file in, trying to read their faces, but they were blank, emotionless. The judge asked if they had reached a verdict, and the foreman stood, holding a piece of paper in his hands. "We have, Your Honor." My heart pounded as the judge asked for the verdict. The foreman unfolded the paper, clearing his throat before he spoke. "On the charge of attempted murder, we find the defendant not guilty." The words hit me like a wave, relief washing over me so intensely that I almost collapsed. I heard gasps and murmurs in the courtroom, but it all faded into the background. All I could focus on was the fact that I was free. I had been vindicated. But the relief was short-lived. On the charge of assault with intent to cause serious harm, we find the defendant guilty. The blood drained from my face. The word guilty echoed in my mind like a death knell. I was going to jail. I was going to lose everything. The room spun around me, and I could barely process what had just happened. The word guilty kept echoing in my head over and over. My lawyer, Linda, squeezed my shoulder, but her reassuring presence couldn't dull the sharp sting of what this meant. 5 years in prison. The judge's sentence felt like a death sentence. I stood there in shock as they handcuffed me, the cold metal of the restraints biting into my wrists. I didn't look at Rachel as they led me out of the courtroom, but I could feel her eyes on me, cold and triumphant. She had won. In the end, despite everything, she had won. The next few months were a blur. Court hearings, prison cells, lawyers, appeals, it all blended together in a haze. Linda fought tirelessly to reduce my sentence, to appeal the verdict. But it was an uphill battle. The media had latched onto the story, turning me into the villain and Rachel into the tragic heroine. I became the poster boy for a man driven to violence by jealousy, while Rachel basked in the attention, continuing to play her part as the innocent victim. In prison, I had too much time to think, too much time to replay everything in my mind: the honeymoon, the discovery, the confrontation. I questioned myself constantly. Could I have handled things differently? Should I have gone to the authorities sooner? Should I have been more careful, more suspicious from the start? But no amount of self-reflection could change what had happened. Rachel had taken almost everything from me: my freedom, my reputation, my peace of mind. She had almost taken my life, and now she was free while I sat behind bars, waiting for an uncertain future. Even in the darkest moments, though, I refused to give up. I couldn't let her win completely. I started to plan. I began thinking about what I would do once I got out, how I would rebuild my life piece by piece. I was determined to clear my name, to find a way to expose Rachel for who she really was. It wouldn't be easy and it wouldn't be quick, but I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't finished yet. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, my sentence was reduced on appeal. I was released after serving 2 years, stepping out into a world that had moved on without me. I was different now, harder, more cautious, but also more determined. Rachel was still out there, living her life, enjoying the spoils of her victory. But I had learned my lesson. I wouldn't be caught off guard again. I would bide my time, gather my strength, and when the moment was right, I would strike back. As I walked out of the prison gates, the sun shining down on me for the first time in years, I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past lift off my shoulders. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: I was a survivor, and I wasn't done fighting. The trial was over, but the aftermath lingered like a thick fog I couldn't escape. The world outside the courthouse had changed, and I was no longer the same person who had stepped onto that cruise ship with dreams of a perfect life. The reporters still followed me, their cameras flashing, their microphones shoved toward me as they asked questions I had no answers for. Linda, my lawyer, stood beside me, always supportive, though I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. She had done everything she could, fought tooth and nail to get me a lighter sentence, to expose Rachel's lies. But even with all the evidence, even with everything I had testified to, the jury saw something in me: a man pushed too far, who pushed back. "It could have been worse," Linda said as we walked to the car. "You could have been convicted of murder." "I know," I muttered, the bitterness creeping into my voice, "but it still feels like she won." And Linda sighed, her eyes softening with sympathy. "She's in prison, Mark, for a long time. She won't have anything left when she gets out." I shook my head, staring out the window as we drove through the city. "But I'm the one who went to jail. I'm the one who lost everything." She didn't argue. What could she say? The media had spun the story in a way that made me look like the villain, even though Rachel had been the mastermind all along. The tabloids had dubbed it the honeymoon horror, turning my life into a public spectacle. Rachel had taken so much from me, and the world was too eager to believe her version of events. When we arrived at my apartment, Linda walked me to the door. "Take care of yourself, Mark," she said softly, squeezing my shoulder. "Don't let this destroy you." I nodded, forcing a weak smile. "Thanks, Linda, for everything." She left, and I was standing alone in the doorway of a place I hadn't seen in months. My apartment felt like a ghost of the life I once had: neat, orderly, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. I walked through the rooms, the memories of Rachel hitting me like a wave. The living room where we had laughed together, the kitchen where she had cooked, her voice filling the space. The bedroom where we had spent so many nights, where I had once felt safe and loved, but it had all been a lie. When I couldn't stay there. Not tonight. The walls felt like they were closing in, the air too thick to breathe. Grabbing my coat, I left the apartment, walking aimlessly through the city streets. The night was cold, but I welcomed it, letting the chill numb the pain inside me. Eventually, I found myself in a small, dimly lit bar, tucked away from the main streets. It was quiet, just a few people nursing their drinks. I slid onto a stool and ordered a whiskey, not looking at anyone, not wanting to talk. I was there to forget. The first sip burned, but it was a welcome distraction. I downed the glass quickly, signaling for another. The warmth spread through me, dulling the sharp edges of my thoughts but not taking them away completely. As I sat there, staring at the amber liquid in my glass, a voice broke through my thoughts. "I mind if I join you?" I looked up, blinking away the haze of alcohol. A woman stood beside me, her expression curious but kind. She was pretty, with dark hair and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Something about her felt familiar, but I couldn't place it. "Oh, go ahead," I said, gesturing to the empty stool beside me. She sat down, ordering a drink for herself. For a few minutes we sat in silence, the sound of clinking glasses and murmured conversations filling the space around us. And then she spoke again, her voice soft but steady. "I saw the trial on the news. I'm sorry for what you went through." Her words caught me off guard. I had heard them from people before, but they had always felt hollow. But something in her tone made me believe she understood. "Thanks," I said, my voice rough. "It was a lot." She nodded, sipping her drink. "I can't imagine. But you made it through. That counts for something." I let out a bitter laugh. "Yeah, but what now? What do I do with the rest of my life?" She turned to me, her gaze piercing. "You rebuild, you learn from it. And maybe you let yourself hope again." Hope, the word felt foreign, almost impossible. But as I looked at her, something stirred inside me. It was faint, barely there, but it was something. A spark. A flicker of something I thought was long gone. We talked for a while longer, about nothing in particular. She didn't pry, didn't push me to open up about things I wasn't ready to share. It was just conversation, easy, natural. For the first time in months, I felt a strange sense of peace, a glimmer of something I hadn't felt in so long, normalcy. As the night wore on, we finished our drinks, and she stood to leave. She gave me a small smile, one that seemed to hold a bit of understanding and warmth. "Take care of yourself, Mark," she said softly, echoing Linda's words. "Don't let it destroy you." I nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "I'll try." She hesitated for a moment, then turned to leave. But before she walked away, she glanced back at me. "And remember," she said, her voice steady and sincere, "it's okay to start over. You deserve to be happy." I watched her disappear into the night, those words hanging in the air around me, "You deserve to be happy." It was a simple statement, but one I hadn't let myself believe for a long time. For the first time in what felt like forever, I let myself consider the possibility. Could I start over? Could I rebuild, piece together something new from the ruins of my life? Maybe I didn't have all the answers yet, but I knew one thing: I wasn't finished. I wasn't done fighting for a better future for myself. The next morning, as the first light of dawn broke through the window of my apartment, I sat on the balcony with a cup of coffee, watching the city wake up around me. The world was quiet, holding its breath. I had survived the nightmare that Rachel had trapped me in. It wasn't over easily, and it wasn't without scars, but I had made it through. Rachel was in prison now. She had lost in the end, even if it didn't feel like the victory I had imagined. Her greed, her cruelty had destroyed her. The woman I thought I loved had never existed. She had been a phantom, a mask worn by someone who had only seen me as a pawn in her twisted game. The sun rose higher in the sky, casting a soft glow over the city. I had spent months haunted by what happened, burdened by the weight of betrayal. But now, as I watched the city come to life, I felt something shift inside me. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to let go, to stop dwelling on what I had lost and start focusing on what I could rebuild. It wouldn't be easy. The scars ran deep, and there would be days when the memories of Rachel and the trial would weigh heavily on me. But I couldn't let it define me anymore. I had to find a way to move forward. As I sat there sipping my coffee, I thought about the woman from the bar. Her words had stayed with me, lingering in my mind. It's okay to start over. I hadn't realized how badly I needed to hear that, how much I had been holding myself back, trapped in the past. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid of it. The past was behind me, and I had survived it. The future was mine to shape now, and I was ready to face it one step at a time. I smiled to myself, a small, tentative smile. Maybe it wasn't over after all. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something new. The sun was shining, the world was full of possibility, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt the stirrings of hope. I had been through hell, but I had come out the other side stronger. I wasn't the same man who had walked onto that cruise ship, naive and blind to the darkness, but I was still here, and that was something. The future was uncertain, but I knew one thing for sure: I was ready to live again. I was ready to rebuild piece by piece, and maybe, just maybe, happiness wasn't so far out of reach after all.